to chaos on India's roads, but this kind of chaos is specific to what we see in rural India. Buses, tractors, two-wheelers, contraptions that look like electric three-wheelers made God knows where, all milling about together here. We are about 4 hours away from Delhi in Bijnor in Uttar Pradesh. We're right outside the district magistrate's office, Karyalay Zila Adhikari Bijnor, and right next to the police superintendent's office as well. Why Bijnor? Because this is the Karma Bhumi of UP's former Chief Minister Mayawati. This is a Lok Sabha constituency and one that will play a crucial role in the road to 2019. Join us as we talk to award-winning author Ruchir Sharma on his 25-year experience of tracking Indian elections. What makes them so special? Why do incumbents face the challenge of being voted out? How connected are politics and development? All of that and more on this edition of The Road to Democracy. The trip to Bijnor is a homecoming of sorts for Ruchir. His summers till 1993 were spent here at his grandparents' home. This is where his romance with India's politics and elections began. So for 25 years, a motley crew of writers and journalists have crisscrossed around the country, capturing the colour and drama of our democracy. 25 years tracking elections in India. Why?
Because, I wrote my first book, Breakout Nations, at the beginning of this decade. That was an economic travelogue of the world. This is more a political travelogue of India. And why I do this is because there's something so sort of charming about coming back to India, about going into the countryside and sort of experience about what exactly life is here like.
Yeah.
And this may have partly been because I spent all my summers growing up
here in Bijnor, yes.
Exactly, growing up in a place
so
like...
the book starts and ends here.
Yeah, so, because of the fact is that, and I think that this is what we tend to forget, which is that at that age, back in the late 1970s and early 1980s, we didn't have much of a choice.
Yeah.
It's not as if our parents asked us that where do you want to go on vacation. But,
yes, but it was always to our grandparents.
Exactly, like our grandparents' place, no matter where they were. So they were here in a sort of backwater like Bijnor, so be it. And we came here and spent a month here. And there was absolutely nothing to do in terms of that the routine was so sort of unstructured. The Ghanta Ghar here at the center here, the clock never worked on that Ghanta Ghar. So there was no sense of time.
Yeah.
And instead what you got was basically, I think that someone said this, that boredom tends to foster creativity. And so when you were like bored out of your minds, what you did was to observe the social behavior of different people, and that sort of stuck in your head. And I think that is what sort of made this such an addictive process for me as to why even today I want to keep coming back to the Indian countryside and experiencing what is it like in terms of the thinking of the 2/3 of Indians who live outside the urban areas.
It's interesting that you talk about wanting to come back to the rural countryside, because in the book, and you've given several anecdotes to capture the fact that you can actually get the story very, very wrong if you ignore what's happening in rural India, if you ignore the rural side of the campaign, so to speak. Take me through the big misses, perhaps, that have happened over the last 25 years. Where did you get it horribly wrong and why?
I trust you to start with the misses, right?
No, I'm just saying that,
Yeah, but I think that there's one thing I can say, that of these 27 election trips that we have done, the entire group, a big tradition that we have maintained, is to keep an honor roll at the end of each sort of election. Okay. Which basically means that we keep a account of all the predictions that we make at the end of each trip. And I can quite proudly say that apart from one instance in 2003, the group has got it broadly correct, at least the direction correct, yes. Now let's focus on 2003, that we were in Rajasthan. This was November of 2003, and Ashok Gehlot then was sort of standing for re-election. And what happened there was that we went out there, we spent a few days traveling in Rajasthan, driving all the way from Delhi to Kota, and then all the way back. And most of us came back thinking that Ashok Gehlot was going to win that election. Yeah. And that was partly conditioned, I think, by two things. One, by the fact that he had just been feted in Delhi and other places. So the curse of the cover story returns.
Exactly.
That, he'd come back to be seen as this sort of, he was voted as the best chief minister of the country. And secondly, we spent most of our times in the urban areas in traveling that trip. I think it was our 5th election trip since this tradition started. And what we really missed out, what we learned later on, was that in the countryside, there was a lot of angst against the Gehlot government, partly because the state had suffered two of its worst droughts in history. Yeah. And this is a very dry state anyway. And it suffered two of the worst droughts in history. So after that trip, I learned the lesson that no matter how bad the hotels, you got to go out in the countryside and spend time, sort of staying at places which may not be exactly the kind of place that you may like. But it's the kind of place that you have to...
You've stayed at the Ritz, not quite the Ritz-Carlton, but there have been...
Yeah, the Ritz-Bengal in Midnapur.
The Ritz-Bengal in Midnapur.
Exactly. Yes. I think that was the kind of hotel where the entire troop reached and really requested me that how far is Kolkata from here? Let's get to Kolkata pretty quickly.
And because it was gecko infested and no water and
yeah, we stayed at a few such hotels. I'd say like Hotel Betia, Hotel Kitchen in Betia, which was sort of dubbed by our group in November 2005 as a vertical dhaba. It was basically a sweet shop, and on top of that were these.
So then, how then, if you've lived in the Ritz in Midnapur and what looks like an elevated dhaba, how then did the limousine liberal moniker get attached with the group?
Nothing is, nothing is worse than that, and I think it's because someone said it in half jest when writing a column, and it sort of.
Someone who, Shekhar Gupta.
Exactly. And it sort of, took on some momentum after that. So basically what happened was that when I first started these trips, I used to hire these 6-door Volvos so that we could all sit together. Because in the 1990s, India didn't have any SUVs. So we'd hire these stretch-door Volvos where we could all sit together, to get the conversation going. There's something very addictive about these conversations. Yeah. And that was the only car available. But after about 5 or 6 trips, those cars would break down so badly repeatedly in the Indian countryside that we ditched those and we started using the Innovas. And we would stay in all these hotels, but you know how it is, that the name sounds very cool, so it stuck. And the other sort of half of the name had to do with liberals. And that too was because about 15 years ago...
It was not a slur.
Exactly. When someone told you that you were a liberal, it wasn't a slur. Today it's become a very polarizing sort of label, that someone calls you someone sort of says you're a liberal or you're a secular. That sort of is almost said in a very derogatory way, because that's how polarized it's become. But if you look at our group too, like about 20 of us, even there the political divisions have increased over time. We have people in our group who are very much right of the center when it comes to the polity in India. But on economics, I think that most people in the group tend to be sort of much more, I'd say, sort of, pro-market, free market kind of people on the group. So these labels are very hard, but they stick.
One of the running themes through the book in India's elections is the high anti-incumbency, quite specifically an Indian phenomena, says Ruchir.
But just look at this, which is that this district of Bijnor has had 59 district magistrates since independence. And what's more remarkable is the fact that in the last about 25-30 years, just look at the turnover. So basically, a district magistrate hasn't been able to serve in this place for more than a year.
लोग अपने occupation को choose करते हैं.
Perhaps it's linked to the state's inability to deliver on the tall promises made by the political class.
Right behind me, farmers protesting, demanding their unpaid dues from sugarcane mills. This is just one of the scenes that we've encountered already as we've entered Uttar Pradesh.
All this within the first hour of our travel through Bijnor. This is a telling sign of what's broken with the Indian state.
What we just saw there, that sugarcane farmers protesting outside the DM's office, being water cannoned. I mean, is that what makes India so ungovernable? The fact that the system is broken at so many levels, and hence the high anti-incumbency that you keep talking about.
Yeah, that's one of the sort of big themes of the book, in fact. This term anti-incumbency, as we've discussed before, is very peculiar to India. Now, I think it's much more than that in terms of what's happening in this election. That's just one of the many factors. But what we saw in the district magistrate's office here in Bijnor captures so many things about this place, about how high people's expectations are, even when the government wants to deliver.
Yeah.
How difficult it is for the actual people on the ground to get what they want. So that's what they were arguing about.
Yeah.
That
the unpaid dues, exactly.
The dues haven't been paid for a long period of time. And for me, it's the entire drama that we saw there, which is why I love coming back to India and doing these election trips.
No, I want to talk about the rural story that you said and the reason why you got directionally the Rajasthan 2003 vote wrong, because you didn't understand the kind of pain that the rural parts of Rajasthan were seeing. Let's look at what happened then with India Shining, and let's look at what's happening currently as well. Because a lot of the conversation, a lot of the discourse right now is about the farm protests. We just saw what happened outside the DM's office as well. How important is this going to be in this election?
Yeah, I really feel that the defining feature of this election is going to be alliances, which is that if you look at the 2014 election, what happened then was, as we well know, that the BJP got 31% of the vote share. But the number of seats it got was 9 times more in terms of like over 280. That ratio was unparalleled in Indian political history. That you never had an instance where a party with 31% of the vote share managed to get more than half the seats in the Lok Sabha. And that happened because the opposition was very badly divided in the key battleground states. I think that in this election, what's going to really matter is that. I don't think the BJP's vote share as such is going to go down too much. Maybe the BJP's vote share will go down a bit in the Hindi heartland area. It may make up a bit in the eastern parts of the country and other parts, maybe. But or it may go down even a bit. But I think that the big thing in this election is going to be about the alliances which are being formed in key battleground states from UP, where we are, right up to Maharashtra. And I think that that's what's really going to define this election more than, I'd say, like this entire debate. In Delhi, we love having these debates about, how is Modi doing and sort of, like how's the budget and how much of sort of anger there is against the government and things. All those, I think, are factors, but the really big factor is going to be how many alliances are stitched, because that's the short history of Indian democracy, that whenever alliances are stitched against a very powerful leader at the center, from Indira Gandhi to Rajiv Gandhi to Vajpayee, typically the alliances tend to prevail. But if the alliances don't come together, then I think that Modi has a pretty good chance of coming back. I think it's as simple as that.
Speaking of alliances, and for the very first time here in UP, which is, as the cliche, the road to Delhi is via UP, Samajwadi Party and the BSP getting together, and Mayawati's political karma bhumi is Bijnor in a sense as well. How significant is that going to be? And the fact that the Congress is outside of that, do you think that that is actually going to work to the advantage of this alliance?
I think, as far as the state is concerned, just the plain math suggests that the alliance is going to be very strong. So in fact, when I came to write the closing chapter of my book on Bijnor late last year, I went back and told our travel companions that I don't think there's any point going to UP this time. At that point in time, it wasn't clear if the alliance would come through or not. But the basic analysis was that if the alliance comes through, then the state basically goes towards the alliance. If the alliance doesn't come through, it goes to the BJP. So I think that as far as this state is concerned, and all the opinion polls, it's hard to trust them at this stage, but for whatever it's worth, seem to confirm that. So I don't think in this election, UP is going to be that important a state, because I think that the vote bases are very entrenched and the mind has been made up. And so I think that this state, the alliance has a clear advantage. I think what's going to determine this election much more are going to be the other states, including the fact that how much does the BJP sort of lose because of the way it's swept.
In 2014.
Exactly, like all the states from right up from Gujarat to Bihar, how much of those, what it does there. And then some key states like, I don't know what's really going to happen in Andhra Pradesh in terms of, like who prevails there. I think Maharashtra, the alliance is going to matter more. So my dream election trip for the 28th election trip for what is being billed as arguably the biggest election in democratic history,
UP.
I think should be that we should basically travel coast to coast, which is to start from Mumbai and go to Visakhapatnam, because I think that belt from Maharashtra, northern Karnataka, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, could be very critical. Now, of course, as far as Indian elections are concerned, the great thing about Indian elections and about India in general, and this is one of the big themes in my book, that this is more a continent than a country. So it's a case of many Indias.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to sort of pinpoint on one or two states where you really want to go. But if you have to really zone into as to where to go, that's where I would ideally like to go.
You know, since you talked about this, the many Indias, two questions. One, how do you reconcile these many Indias with the BJP and Prime Minister Modi's idea of a new India, which is what they're pitching to voters? And secondly, how important are the local issues in a national election? When you talk about assembly elections, the argument was that, look, doesn't matter that they've lost the three Hindi heartland states in December, because this was about local issues. A national election is very, very different. 2019 will look very differently. In a general election, how crucial are local issues versus national issues?
It is very much going to be a more locally driven election than a national election, is my sort of feeling, even though it is supposed to be a Lok Sabha election. And I think that this is where, again, I feel the narrative in Delhi, Bombay, or even outside of India tends to be very misleading, because there people want to see this as a presidential race, that in terms of Modi versus the rest. And yeah, there are maybe some elements of that. But really, when you come down and talk to voters, even at the national level, my feeling is that it's really going to be about state to state. I mean, but obviously Modi will be a very big factor, but it will be about each state leader and each regional party. So I think that, and this idea that the elections are very different when assembly and national.
Is that an excuse more than a valid argument?
No, I mean, it's not an excuse, but I don't see any empirical evidence for that. That if you look at what happened in the previous state elections also, that if a state or national election followed each other very closely, you didn't get much of a difference as far as the outcomes were concerned. So I don't see there's going to be much of a difference between the two voting patterns this time either.
Okay, let's talk about the issues that will dominate the narrative this time around. And I want to focus a little bit on what the experience over the last 25 years has told you on the connection between development and how people vote. Because, for instance, in Bihar, and you do believe that Bihar is one of the most transformed states in India, one would imagine that Nitish Kumar's victory was on account of the development card, or Prime Minister Modi's victory in 2014 was because Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. How important is that, and is this correlation as deep as we think it is?
No, I think that the electoral history of India suggests this connection between economics and politics is very tenuous at best. So in fact, this was very well articulated to me by a local politician who we met in Mangalore during our Karnataka election trip of May of last year. And what this politician, UT Khadir was his name, what he told us was, I think, quite insightful. He basically said that an Indian election is about a contest of 6 metrics. Or, it's like you're taking 6 exams and you have to basically pass each exam with a minimum score of at least 35%.
Okay, what 6 exams do you have to pass?
He didn't sort of spell that out, but sort of, if I were to cull the list after having traveled, clearly caste and religion is the starting point. And unless you get that right, it's very difficult to win an election. Then things like family connections matter, welfareism matters, how much money you spent does tend to matter, even though I think it is a bit exaggerated how much money drives politics. Then I think that issues like corruption matter, and then possibly you have development. So you have 6 factors. And what that basically tells you is that if you end up...
So caste is right on top?
Yes, I think caste is right on top, but I think that development...
And development's at the bottom?
No, not necessarily, but it's at best one of these 6 factors. So if you believe that you just get development right and you can win an election in India, that's just not wrong. And there's one statistic which illustrates that, and we've spoken about this in the past. There have been 27 instances since 1980 when a state has grown at a rate of more than 8% during the full term of a chief minister. Of these 27 instances, about half the time, that chief minister has lost the election. And that for me is such a telling statistic, that you can grow at 8% or
and
more
yet not come back to power.
Yet not come back to power. In most countries, an 8% type economic growth would be considered an economic miracle, which would sweep the incumbent back to power. In the US, this pocketbook theory is of elections is very popular, which is that how your pocketbook's doing on metrics like, what is prices and unemployment really determine electoral outcomes. There's a very good sort of statistical fit for that. We just don't have that in this country. So believe that if you end up getting a very strong growth rate, that's just one of the factors.
Okay.
Even Bihar, it's a very interesting case that you mentioned. So as I write in the book, that we've done 5 election trips to Bihar between 2005 and 2015, both state and national. No state has been transformed as much. Its per capita income has nearly quadrupled in that period, which is absolutely amazing, and you can feel the change out there. And yet, had Nitish Kumar not got the alliances correct, he would have still lost. So 2014, because he fought separately, independently from both the BJP and Lalu's party, he lost. Because his vote share there just can't seem to break above 20%, because he comes from a caste where, where his vote share is only 4%, and he's been able to build a caste coalition of 20%. But even with that, he can't win an election on his own. Despite the fact that
he's been able to deliver this economic transformation that you talk of.
Exactly. So I think that is the history of India, which is that development is just one of the many factors which matters, and you have to look at a whole host of factors, and that's probably the mistake that the Vajpayee government made in 2004, which is well documented now.
Since we're talking about development and the narrative at this point in time against the Mahagathbandhan is that you want a mazboot sarkar or do you want a majboor sarkar? And coalitions don't deliver on growth, coalitions don't deliver on performance, coalitions are bad for development, but history doesn't bear that out.
Yeah. Coalition
But do you think something's changed now?
No, I think, coalition is just the history of this country. In fact, if you look at many other countries with such diversity, from even countries in Europe or countries like Canada, all these countries have learned to live with coalition governments. So I think that coalition governments is a product of the heterogeneity and the diversity of this country. And that is just a reality, which has come to be ever since India became a true multi-party democracy. So I think that you can't just wish away coalitions and hope for an alternative. I don't think that the diversity of this country truly allows that to happen. So one is the reality. The second is that is that good or bad for the country, even though it's a reality. And as you mentioned, that there is absolutely no evidence to suggest that having a very strong, stable government in the center leads to higher economic growth rates. There is no sort of empirical evidence against to back that. And there's the other point that I'll make here, which is that in India, I believe that it is very hard to govern this country very strongly from the center. This is a country where it is a very federal structure, and the diversity is such that it's best governed by states and chief ministers at a state level having the power to do so. And that's how India has transformed, that the big economic success stories in India have really been at a state level. Whether it was even Gujarat, you can argue, even the likes of Madhya Pradesh, and also from Delhi to Bihar, that when you had a dynamic state chief minister, you ended up getting a pretty good growth spurt, and that's what I write in the book as well.
So since you talk about the fact that for India to grow and for India to do well, 7% is almost autopilot now, but 7% plus 8% kind of trajectory is for each individual state to amp up its economic performance. So, as you look at where things stand today and over the last few trips that you've done, which is the state that, like Bihar, has surprised you?
I'd say that there are surprises in India on both fronts. So,
good and bad.
Exactly, good and bad. So you mentioned about Bihar, and clearly some of these states, like we had seen at least Madhya Pradesh, even Rajasthan, like the so-called Bimaru states that they were called once. I think we've seen a fair amount of transformation as far as these states are concerned. But I've also seen regression. And I think that Tamil Nadu stands out for me as that this is a state that had done spectacularly well in the 80s and 1990s. Even when we went to Tamil Nadu on our first election trip in 2006, you could really see the transformation of that state, or at least how better developed the states the state was, the quality of its roads, the quality of the housing, the basic infrastructure, how better it was. And then when we returned for the trip in 2016, it was a marked deterioration that we saw. That because of the problems of rampant alcoholism and other problems related to that, like a lot of absenteeism, that Tamil Nadu had sort of gone the other way. So I think that's the sort of growth game in India, that you get movement both ways. Some states
surprise on the upside.
like Bihar would be sort of one of the better states in the 1950s and 1960s on a relative basis. And look what happened to Bihar after that.
Yeah.
Now Bihar has shown some signs of a comeback. Tamil Nadu, the opposite's been going on out there, and like hoping that switches back in Tamil Nadu. So that's the story of many India. That you keep getting this switches which take place, and also when you travel like this country, like you begin to realize this whole story of many Indias. Like I mentioned in the book that when we go to Tamil Nadu, we have to literally go with translators.
Yeah.
Because most of the people in our group just cannot understand the language there. And there, if you speak to somebody in Hindi, it's basically like going to France in the countryside and speaking to somebody in English. It's not taken that well in terms of as far as Hindi is concerned. There's a lot of resentment against Hindi, and that's the reason why the BJP has found it so difficult
to make inroads into the south.
Exactly. I mean, to make inroads into the south because of that. I mean, when I tell my friends back in the US that we attended a rally of Modi in Karnataka, not too far from Bangalore in 2018. And Modi back then basically came on stage, and when he first started to speak, he spoke a couple of lines in Kannada, and the crowd really erupted, got very excited. And then he very quickly switched to Hindi with a Kannada translator, and there was a complete drop-off in the excitement levels of the crowd. And so therefore, like, we returned from the trip sensing that for Modi to have the big impact in Karnataka would be very difficult compared to the impact that he had in the previous year in Uttar Pradesh. And I think that's just the reality of this country.